Yes, I vote yes.
Council President Nelson.
I vote yes.
6 in favor, 3 opposed.
Well, some voices of protest there in city council chambers this week during the vote on the new contract the city finally hammered out with rank and file police officers. Why did 3 council members turn this deal down? And what does this say about the relationship between the council and the SPD going forward? Plus, why did the city have to double its bailout to local affordable housing providers? And just how crowded will your ballot be next year in King County? All this and so much more this week on Seattle News, Views, and Brews, your coffee break political podcast. I'm Brian Callanan. I am a host on the Seattle channel. The views expressed here are mine, and I'm joined by my friend and co-host, David Croman, City Hall reporter for the Seattle Times. And folks, David is on triple duty this week, joining me for the podcast, covering City Hall issues for the Seattle Times. And you're doing flood coverage too, David. What's going on?
Yeah, I'm just kind of feeling I'm not out in my, rain jacket.
Okay.
Covering live. I'm the sit at the desk guy and rewrite stuff that comes in if need be.
You got to do that too, man. Careful out there, folks. Atmospheric rivers this week. No joke. Flooding all over the place there. Thank you, David. As always, thanks to our background noise sponsor, City Grind Espresso on the first floor of City Hall. If you can, please support this show, starting at just $5 per month. With that, you'll get access to Patrons First podcast before anybody else does. You'll also get your very own Seattle News, Views, and Brews decal. That's pretty cool. Also, patrons, an announcement is just around the corner, I promise, about a patrons-only appreciation event coming up very soon. Stay tuned on that. If you want to join in, head to Patreon online and support Seattle News, Views, and Brews. Also, thank you for watching this podcast on Converge Media. The video version is on Converge Wednesday nights coming up at 7. All right, let's go. Time for Right Here, Right Now. So the City Council finalized its vote on its contract with 2 police unions this week. SPMA, this is the Seattle Police Management Association. These are lieutenants and captains. Then you got SPOG, the Seattle Police Officers Guild, the rank and file officers, a lot more of them. The police management vote, unanimous, 9-0. SPOG was a 6-3 vote, though, with council members Saka, Rink, and Lynn voting no. They all cited concerns that this contract, which includes a 13% raise, does not include all that much progress towards implementing officer accountability measures. David, I wanted to get to the nut of this. How significant is this split in the vote when it comes to the city council's relationship with the police department? What do you think?
Yeah, I mean, voting down a contract would be, I don't know if unprecedented is the right word, but it would be a fairly dramatic gesture and step to take. The last time there was a vote on a contract, I can't remember exactly what year it was, but, it was a year in which there were a lot of progressives on the council, and I think only Councilmember Sawant ended up voting against it.
Yeah.
And so, the fact that 3 people voted against it, and including Councilmember Saka, who I think was the surprise because, he's not he was a pretty anti-defund the police guy, was part of what underpinned a lot of his campaign. So it is a notable thing, in part because the way in which these contracts end up in front of the city council is they pretty much show up fully baked, and there's just no amending them. There's no way that you can change what's in the contract because it goes through the bargaining process. It goes to the unions who have to ratify it, and then it gets a vote in this sort of secretive labor relations committee, and that has a majority of the council on it. It has 5 members. So if it has made it out of that committee, it already has won a majority of the vote. And so you can't, there's no proposing amendments to these things. So it's an up or down vote. And a lot of people believe that if you were to vote it down, the union would have a pretty good claim to a unfair labor practice. So it just puts the council in a position where they have a lot of pressure to approve these things without any ability to change them. And what we saw at 3 council members, which again is a high number, who felt uncomfortable with it and were willing to take it down despite all the complexities that come with it because, and they're right, like as in relation to the 2017 accountability ordinance, this contract is less than that.
Explain why.
So I mean, it's so complicated, but in 2017, the city council passed this fairly sweeping set of accountability reforms, but they have been essentially undercut ever since that was passed by the contracts, because in the context of police working conditions, the contract is king. And So this law is technically still on the books, and a lot of its measures have not been implemented because it hasn't shown up in the contract. So the big ones are subpoena power for civilian investigators into police misconduct and civilian involvement in investigating misconduct. I would say that the biggest piece that is not included in this contract, and there are some reasons for that because it might be more of a state question, but is this question of arbitrator involvement and arbitrators' ability to overturn disciplinary decisions. Kind of number one thing for a lot of police reformers that gets in the way of disciplining and accountability. Neither of those things are in this contract, and that was a big sticking point for Lynn, Rink, and Saka.
Got it. And I also noticed that Councilmember Kettle, who's the chair of the Public Safety Committee, was part of a back and forth battle of press releases here early this week. Councilmember Saka put out one talking about his no vote, essentially previewing his no vote. And Kettle actually released one just before that talking about police hiring going up, crime stats going down, a collaborative spirit, as he put it, around City Hall on public safety. But when you have the chair of the Public Safety Committee voting yes with Kettle, and then the vice chair, Saka, voting no, what does that say about what's going on within the council when it comes to their approach to the police department? What do you think?
Yeah, well, and Saka, it's very Seattle, this whole thing, which is fighting via dueling press releases. But then, Saka kept going on and on about correcting the record, which I believe he was talking about some comments made by Kettle, particularly around what police could subpoena today or what kind of records they could get today.
Yeah.
No one's actually using each other's names in these fights.
Right.
Yeah, very Seattle. I was surprised that Saka came out against this, but he talked a lot about he talked a lot. I think he spoke for 25 minutes, but he talked a lot about his past work as a lawyer and as a person involved on King County commissions for police reform. Yeah. He did talk about his experience as a black person with police and kind of what that meant to him, which was powerful. Kettle, on the other hand, Kettle's entire kind of mission on the council has really been around more police, getting more police on the force and putting them to work. He uses this language around cracking down on the permissible environment in the city. And, he sees kind of a lot of his goals as a council person as needing more police officers. And so, he also expressed some frustration with some of the accountability measures that were namely not in this contract. But, at the end of the day, the priority for him is to get as many cops through the door as you can. And, the thing about this is like these raises are significant, and the raises that came in at the beginning of the year appeared to be enough to get more cops through the door. They were hiring at a dramatic pace, and yet they still saw fit to give their members even more raises. And I think that's reflective largely of the leverage that the Police Officers Guild had in these negotiations. The most powerful tool of the Police Guild is their understanding that politicians come and go and they don't go anywhere. They are really good at waiting out politicians and understanding that politicians have to go to the public and win re-election. They don't have to do that. And so I think Mike Solon and the Guild, whatever you think of them, was very aware of the fact that police alternatives and care in particular and accountability were very important electorally, and they squeezed the city for everything they had to allow some amount of accountability improvements, again, pretty modest ones, and allow for police alternatives to function more independently, and they're getting paid very well in exchange.
Yeah, boy, I'm interested to see where this goes in terms of hiring numbers and what this means for the council within itself when it comes to its approach to public safety next year, and the police and the relationship with the police department, too. I did want to point out, though, that Councilmember Kettle is also working hard, David, to make sure police enforce some new rules the council passed regarding after-hours clubs. So I'm talking about the chronic nuisance ordinance the council updated a few months ago. This allows police to shut down clubs if there are multiple shooting incidents attached to a location, for example, including some off-property incidents. David, your colleague Sarah Jean Green was writing about this. It appears this law is having an effect. In the first half of the year, there were 32 shootings related to nightlife. In the second half, after the council passed this law in July, we're down to 14. What do those numbers tell you?
Yeah, I mean, as she pointed out in the piece, it's a small number, and so it's hard to draw overly dramatic conclusions from it, but it's suggestive. I think this, for the last 2 years, one of the approaches to gun violence that this city hall and the city attorney took was to kind of look at micro trends, I suppose, which is like focus on geographic areas. And this was actually a recommendation in an audit. I think it was an audit around gun violence, which is the city should focus more on like specific geographic areas that have a lot of gun violence. And
right.
So the focus on nightclubs kind of fits within that, which is that, you can get into the root causes of all of that. But if you look at the data, it appears that a disproportionate number of shootings happen outside of nightclubs between the hours of 2 and 5. And so therefore focusing on that would make a difference.
Yep.
Again, early returns suggest perhaps it's making a difference. It's hard to, the numbers are small enough. It's hard to prove that conclusively. And I don't think Scott Lindsay at the city attorney's office would dispute that these aren't, it's not like the case is closed on this necessarily, but the trends are good. And, but it's at the same time, the overall shootings and at least murders seem to be going down nationally and in Seattle. So hard to know which is which, but they have used this law apparently to shut down a few establishments. And when this bill was first introduced, I had talked to Scott Lindsay and Bob Kettle about this, Councilmember Kettle about this, and they had a list of 10 places. Like they knew how they were going to use this. They knew exactly which establishments they wanted to shut down. They just didn't feel like they had the mechanism to do it. Now they do, and they appear to be going about shutting a lot of those businesses down.
Yeah, and I mean, it's in a couple of cases at least, these were some hookah lounges out there called out by the city as chronic nuisances. They've simply closed their doors permanently rather than try to comply with anything here, pay fines, etc., what city leaders are asking for. And I guess I'm torn a little bit. Overall, I guess it's good to shut down nuisance properties. I get that. But it sounds like in some cases, these businesses and their owners didn't even understand how these laws work. Is that a bother to you at all? Am I reading too far into this? What do you think?
Yeah, I mean, on the surface, I haven't met or talked to these people, so I don't want to draw too broad conclusions about their ability to understand the laws, but you're right that there were some examples of people who were kind of hit with early warnings and threats of fine. There's a guy in the piece who talked about how there was this initial threat of a fine, and then the hearing examiner waived the fine, and the guy told the newspaper, told Sarah Jean, that he thought that meant that he was kind of off the hook for this, that he had done what he needed to do. And even Scott Lindsay in the piece too said, I think if he had been actually made to pay that first $1,000 fine, there wouldn't have been repeat offenses, as it were. Right. There were, and now he was facing $20,000 in fines, and opted instead to just shut down the whole business. Which, hookah lounges and their operations have been a point of tension, both in among. We can look back to the 2015 proposal from then Mayor Ed Murray to shut down a lot of hookah lounges. That really blew up in his face because, for obvious reasons, which is that a lot of these are owned and run by particularly East African immigrants. And targeting them broadly it didn't look great. At the same time, there appear to be a few on the city's radar that just tend to be the site of a lot of violence. And so I don't think anyone in the city attorney's office is probably unhappy that this business is just no longer operating.
Fair. All right, well, coming up, the city council made a historic investment in housing and human services, including what David has reported on as a massive bailout. What's happening here? More details next on Now Hear This. Well, the city of Seattle is doubling down, spending twice what it did last year to help out some affordable housing providers in financial trouble. $28 million from the city for next year versus $14 million spent this year. Why are these funds needed? Well, a lot of reporting going on this. David was talking about this. These providers are seeing rising costs. There are some rental payments that aren't coming in like they're supposed to from renters. There are vacancies, too. These providers have actually sold or transferred at least 20 buildings since late last year. As Patience Malaba, the executive director of the Housing Development Consortium, explained it at a press conference earlier this fall, providers are depending on the city to stay strong.
And we know the extraordinary capacity that our members have in producing housing, preserving housing, and ensuring stability. But they can only do that with the robust investments that the city can move forward and allocate each year.
David, I'm trying to figure out what this tells you, that the city has to increase its bailout dollars. I'm thinking about the city really touting the fact that it made $350 million worth of investments in affordable housing in the budget this year. That's a record. But I'm looking at this, and this is not the kind of history or record, at least with this particular investment, that you want to repeat. Help me out with this. What does this bailout mean?
No, yeah, I mean, when voters approve, say, a housing levy or vote for candidates who support the payroll tax levy, which are both ostensibly dedicated toward building new housing, what they want is for the city to build new housing. But $42 million over 2 years is not an insignificant amount of money that is going not to build new housing, but just to keep the housing that the city already has afloat. And
right. So just for maintenance and things of that nature, is that what we're talking about?
Yeah. I mean, it's just the math on a lot of these is not working out right now. So all of the affordable housing providers will submit their own proposals and how they want to spend that money. But, some of them will use it on deferred maintenance. Some of it will use it on security, security cameras. Some of it might just use it on kind of rent arrears, money that they did not get from tenants. As we've talked about a few times, there's a lot of stuff going on in the affordable housing sector, which is maintenance and security are still big costs. Insurance has gone way up. Utilities have gone way up. And all of this is happening while the providers are just not collecting the amount of rent that they forecast that they would have, either because people are just not paying it for various reasons, or in a certain band of affordable housing, there's a lot of vacancies. So both of those things are problems. So, the question here is both the $14 million last year and the $28 million this year were framed as these are one-time kind of supportive payments. But when you talk to affordable housing providers, they say both of those pots of money don't even really come close to what the need is. And there has not been a lot of concrete action or movement to make sure that these are actually one-time payments rather than something that the city is just going to have to do every year, because the situation is pretty bad and it's fine to give people money to help stay afloat and not need to sell buildings. But if the math equation is just the money out doesn't equal the money in, then this problem's going to come up again next year.
Yeah, it's not a long-term solution for sure.
No, yeah, it's a pretty underrated issue that Katie Wilson's going to have to deal with, because she wants to build new housing and she wants to make the city more affordable. But the first thing you got to do is kind of stop the bleeding of the housing that we have now.
Yeah, hear you on that. And I did want to ask, I don't know if this enters the conversation at all, just the uncertainty that we're seeing around federal funding, et cetera. How does that factor into what's going on with affordable housing and kind of what's next here? What do you think?
Yeah, it's a good question. I think that is a big question for permanent supportive housing. Which,
right.
Is certainly also having a lot of struggles, a lot of which echo the struggles of the industry sector wide. But the issues are not just contained within permanent supportive housing. These are providers of affordable housing for teachers and baristas and things like that. So 60-70% AMI. They're seeing problems too. I don't know that the federal government, the specific policies of the federal government are playing into that all that much.
Okay.
Though I think in a sort of indirect way, there are going to be questions about federal tax credits value in how much banks are going to want to invest federal tax credits into Seattle's affordable housing market.
Yeah.
And I think that part of that is because of the federal condition. So I would say in an indirect way it matters, but maybe not in the sort of direct way that it does matter for permanent supportive housing or kind of homelessness services.
Thank you. Thank you for that distinction. I also wanted to talk with you, Dave, about this major court case unfolding in Seattle this week. Essentially, Seattle's response to CHOP, the Capitol Hill organized protest zone of 2020, on trial this week. We're talking about the wrongful death lawsuit. This is in connection with 16-year-old Antonio Mays Jr., shot and killed inside the CHOP, where camp security prevented police from coming in. Now, thanks to some newly reviewed video from Converge Media by Sidney Brownstone, David Gutman of The Times, and Will James of KUOW, shows that Mays may not have been involved in a felony, as the city has alleged. This feels like kind of a bombshell moment here, David. What do you make of this case?
Yeah, I mean, the specifics of how it shakes out and what the city doesn't have, I don't know. I think the things that stood out to me about their reporting were the people they talked to who had not been contacted by the city, which were several. And that is always notable. If reporters are getting to sources first, you kind of question maybe some of the investigations that are happening in the city. And,
sure,
props to them for finding some of these people.
Yeah.
The other piece is just I look at this in a kind of holistic way, which is it just feels like Seattle never had full closure from that time. It was so intense, and it was so many things all at once. And I think it kind of left a scar in Seattle in a way that I think a lot of people maybe tried to move on from pretty quickly and forget about to an extent. But it does feel like that was this intense moment that requires a bit of a reckoning. And I am glad that the reporters at my paper and at KUW are taking the time to do that. And I know they're working on a longer project that I think kind of looks at a lot of these questions. And so, I think revisiting it and, I think there's a lot wrapped up in this case because it's this unsolved death. And that is in some ways a metaphor for like just what happened.
Yeah. How did that happen like that? Yeah. I know.
And so I just think there's a lot of obviously for the family, there's a lot of emotions wrapped up in this, but I think for the city too, just because it feels like this, it was this kind of WTF moment. And it just felt like it seems like there was a lot of people at fault, and yet none of them sort of ended up paying all that much for whatever happened there. And I think in some sense that like there was some sort of neglect on the part of the city and some neglect on the part of the people involved in this establishment of the CHOP, and just a lot of blame to go around that ended up in 2 people being killed. And no one has really ever been held accountable for that. And I think that's why there's kind of so much emotion wrapped up in the particular case, even though it is just a civil case. It's not a criminal case.
Yeah, just a civil case. It does carry a cost with it, though. And I think about what the city has spent on CHOP already. 2022, there was a $500,000 settlement for one case. 2023, $3.6 million for business property owners there who said, what's going on here? We need to get to our business. And then last year, $10 million, a settlement with 50 people harmed by SPD's response. I don't know exactly what's going to happen with Mays here, but I wonder about the dollar amount involved. I wonder if this somehow opens the door for other legal claims against the city. I mean, I just have this strange sense that we're not done with this yet after this wrongful death case with Mays.
No, yeah, and I don't know what it would mean to be done with this. So yeah, I mean, I'm always eager to hear more reporting from my colleagues on this because I think it's a very it's even though it's been 5 years almost, it's still feels like an open story to me. Yep,
feels pretty fresh to me. That's right when this podcast started in January of 2020, and boy, were we in for a ride there. Totally different story that unfolded there over that year. All right, well, coming up, that King County ballot you're going to be getting next year, maybe a little more crowded than usual. We'll explain coming up on What's Next. Well, a report from the Northwest Progressive Institute this week points out that next year, which is just a couple of weeks away, we are going to have an even year with 2026, and that means a new election set up for King County. So King County will hold regular elections for King County Council in an even-numbered year, along with elections for assessor and elections director. This means voters will be filling in 6 positions in addition to the post of prosecuting attorney in this upcoming cycle here. So I know NPI was pushing for this in 2022, and here we go. And I know we're going to get more voter turnout, David. We always do in even years, but we're talking 4 county council seats, assessor, elections director, prosecuting attorney. I left out partridge in a pear tree, but what do you think about this? Now that King County is faced with it, what do you make of that really crowded ballot?
I understand the push to get these positions on the ballot because the turnout in off-year elections are not good. And, you just look at how many people voted in the Alexis Mercedes Rank versus Tanya Wu city council race, which happened to fall on a presidential race. It was Tanya, I think I saw a chart. Tanya Wu got the 5th most votes of any council person in Seattle history, but she still lost.
Lost. Right.
And so that is worthwhile. At the same time, I think we get a little picture of this when there are 7 city council people on the ballot every 4 years. That it is just, and I come at this from a reporter, so in some ways I'm speaking in a biased way.
Me too.
From my personal experience, but it's just impossible to fully inform or vet these people when there are that many of them on the ballot at times. So, I think there's going to come a time when someone is going to get elected or get really close to being elected and something is going to come up about their past or something they said or whatever, and everyone's going to say, why didn't the media uncover this? And the answer is going to be because there are not that many of us, and there are 18 million people on the ballot. So I don't know that that's the best justification for.
Yeah.
I fully understand why people want these in the even years.
Yeah.
Just as a reporter, it will mean that these candidates are not as well vetted as perhaps they could otherwise be.
Yeah, I hear you, and I'm feeling very selfish about bringing this up now that you mention it, because it is difficult from a news reporting standpoint. I did want to ask, though, I think about the midterms, and everyone's talking about them on a national level. Is this going to be a situation where these candidates that are more left-leaning, more Democrat? I'm just trying to think of that King County Democrat vote and how it was a very strong part of what happened in some of the elections here in this past cycle here in the city of Seattle. Is this going to be something, that kind of phenomenon, playing out yet again at the local level in King County next year when it's midterm time? What do you think?
Yeah, I don't know. It's a good question. I mean, the last kind of swing towards the more moderate candidates in City Hall unfolded over 2 election cycles, first in 21 and then 23. So I guess my inclination is this would be at least 2-year or 2 election cycle pattern, but that's just kind of pure speculation. Who knows what happens in the next year and in this current environment.
Yeah, it's a rather politically charged environment. That's for sure.
Yeah.
All right, David, it is definitely time to wrap up here. I wanted to make sure I asked, anything cooking in the first week of Major League Baseball's winter meetings that have anything piquing your interest out there? What do you got?
Yeah, I mean, I want the Mariners to go big and trade for Ketel Marte or somebody, but I don't think they're going to do it. So I expect to leave disappointed. So no, it's always a frustrating time of year as a Mariners fan because they never do as much as you want them to do.
Yeah, I know. 8 outs away from making the World Series too. We just need that one little piece, exactly. I think, to get over the top. And we're just over 2 months away from pitchers and catchers coming down for spring training. So we'll get there. We'll get there, David, I promise. Well, thank you, David, as always, for joining me. Thanks to everybody listening out there to Seattle News, Views, and Brews, where you can always find out what's brewing in local politics. If you like what you're hearing, great. Become a patron. Support the show. Head to Patreon online. Find Seattle News, Views, and Brews. Pledge $5 a month or more. And thank you very, very much for the support. You can hear this podcast on Apple, Spotify, wherever you listen. Thanks for watching on Converge Media, too. We will see you next time. Seattle News, Views, and Brews is an independent production of Callanan Media Services. Copyright 2025.